Welcome to Mr. Chalk's Revision Tips.
When answering exam questions, there are a few key things to remember, right? So just remember, exam technique is a key part in preparation for any exams, and it's something that you'll pick up the more you go and you do past papers. Right, so many questions in exams are repeats of what will be in old exams. So going and looking at lots of generic questions beforehand is a good idea. When going and answering and questions and reading them, there's a few things just take into account. Make sure you go read the question at least twice so you don't make any mistakes when you're reading them. As you're reading them, go highlight key information. Don't make assumptions about what the question is asking. Make sure after you've answered it, you go check your work for daft errors that you might make. And if it involves going and answering something where there's some calculation, make sure that you write your workings out down. Right, let's go and have a look at the question.
Water is one of our key or the main sort of biological solvent that is used within living organisms. It's used in lots of metabolic reactions and such forth. So water, like we'll see, is comprised of one oxygen molecule and two molecules of hydrogen. So although water on the whole is electrically neutral, right, so the sharing of electrons is uneven between the oxygen and the hydrogen atoms. So the oxygen atom attracts more strongly the electrons to it than the hydrogen atoms do, resulting in a weak negatively charged region around the hydrogen atom and a weak positively charged area around the hydrogen atom. So you can see on this diagram we've got a weak negative charge there and a weak positive charge there, or a partial charge. So the separation of charge is due to electrons in the covalent bonds, so remember that they're being covalently bonded together, being unevenly shared, right, and this is called a dipole. So hydrogen bonds form between the individual water molecules. So we can see there, between them, we're forming hydrogen bonds. So as a result of the polarity of water, the hydrogen bonds form between the positively and the negatively charged regions on adjacent water molecules. So water molecules that are next to each other. So hydrogen bonds, however, are only relatively weak. So we can see there that we don't go and draw in a proper bond. It's only kind of like a dotted line showing that it's only a partial bond. Right? So when there are few, they are constantly breaking and reforming. However, a large number of them can go and increase the strength. So hydrogen bonds contribute to many properties of water. So some of the properties of water is that it's an excellent solvent, so things dissolve in water really well. It's got a very, very high specific heat capacity. So when we go and we talk about organisms living in water, that is quite important. It's got a relatively high latent heat of vaporization. Water is less dense than solids. So water has a relatively high surface tension. So if something comes up about things going in, like insects skating around on top of ponds or something, that's because it has a high surface tension. And it acts as a really good reagent. Right? So water, like we've said, is a polar molecule. So things like ions will go and dissolve in it. So this allows chemical reactions to happen within cells. Things like metabolites can go and be transported quite efficiently by water. So the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules allow strong cohesion between the water molecules, which means that they'll stick together quite well. So water is also able to hydrogen bonds to other molecules, so things like cellulose. So we go and we think about the cellulose that we find in xylem in plants. So we go and look at a few questions. So this one, it talks about water has many properties that are essential for living organisms. Right, explain, right, the big important bit there is the explain part. how properties relating to the density, right? So the density of water contribute to the survival of organisms. So you can think of a range of organisms. So for instance, ice is less dense than water, so it floats. So anything that's going and providing a habitat, so something like polar bears or penguins or whatever, that are living on that ice that is floating, that's relatively important. That floating ice insulates the water below, so anything that's living aquatically below it, that will help them go and survive. Or if you can talk about something like oxygen or nutrients, etc., can go and circulate within that water. Because the water has a similar density to the living organisms, it means that organisms can go and float on top of it. So we think something like a duck or something can float on the water, it doesn't sink. Right, and this next one, so hydrogen bonds allow water to act as a solvent. Right, so the key bit there is that you're thinking about it being a solvent. Why is the ability of water to act as a solvent important for the survival of organisms? Right, there are a range of things that you can talk about. So you can talk about that it acts as a medium for chemical or metabolic reactions. Talk about various, there's all sorts of named ions that you can go and talk about. You can talk about the fact that this allows it to go and transport things. If you can go name things that it's transporting, so things like glucose or other things such as urea. We can talk about the fact that organisms can absorb mineral ions or oxygen or whatever from the water. And it's also able to dilute toxic substances. So like we said, if you've got urea in the blood, then that will be diluted by the fact that you've got these water present in it. So hopefully you have found that useful. If you've got any questions, then drop it in the comments below, and we'll be uploading a lot more. Right, good luck, folks.